Hello and welcome to About Making. Cultural Exchange is the title for today. This is our third online dialogue in a series of three. My name is Stephen Knott. I'm a writer, researcher and lecturer in craft theory and history, and will be the moderator for today's discussion. There's a few more people I'm sure going to join us as I speak, but just say a few words of introduction before going to the speakers for today. Today's dialogue forms a part of the About Making project by Eleena Jamil, who's here with us, who is based in Malaysia, and partners here in the United Kingdom comprising of myself, Dr. Christoph Lueder and Abbe Fletcher. And this project is supported by the British Council's Connections Through Culture Grant 2021. Today we'll be hearing from Salo Critchin and Pablo Boariac of the One-to-One Collective, based in Tolworth, near to where I am here in Kingston. And we'll also be talking to and hearing from Daliana Suryawanata and Florian Heinzelman of Shao, an architectural practice with offices in Indonesia, the Netherlands and Germany. I'll introduce our speakers in more detail just in a very short while. Just want to say a few words about the About Making project. So today's dialogue, which is the third in a series of three, serves as a response to a set of episodes that are available on YouTube, produced over the last few months, that mainly comprise of interviews with craftspeople, architects and designers in Malaysia and the broader region of Southeast Asia and the United Kingdom, which are most of the United Kingdom examples are primarily London-based. So these interviews explore different aspects of making and processes of craft, making and process of craft and architecture, the interwoven relationship between these two fields, and the sustainable solutions that arise from speaking to and learning from traditional craftspeople. The episodes features interviews with Showmaker in Thailand, Shao in Indonesia, and the One-to-One Collective Notpla and Amin Tahar here in London. All of these episodes are available on the YouTube channel, which can be found through the aboutmaking.com website. The core film of the series, episode 3, features interviews with traditional craftspeople in Malaysia and is entitled Tukang. The tukang is a generic Malay word for someone who is skilled in any art of making, but in this context it means a craftsperson who is well versed in the building techniques of traditional timber houses found in Malaysia and other parts of Southeast Asia. Academics and architects often laud and equate these timber houses with ideal sustainable models for architecture for the tropics. But one element that is often missing in the conversation is the role of the craftsperson or tukang in the processes of the creation of this rich architectural culture. Traditionally, a house tukang would be fully responsible for the design and build from start to completion. He is a passionate master builder working with a team of apprentices, and often he's a skillful carver and fully understands aesthetics. He has a deep knowledge of materials and knows where to source them. He is also a ritual leader working in accordance with a highly ordered process within the framework of geomancy and religion. Lastly, he is seen as a community leader working closely with members of local communities in various stages of the building process. Today, we will focus primarily on cultural exchange, a theme at the core of this project, itself a collaboration between Eleena in Malaysia and British partners based here in London and supported by the British Council's Connecting Through Culture grant. So in the project overall, we have tried to consider what could be learned from the idea of tukang, what could be learned from this vernacular Malaysian context in a broader field, both beyond in Southeast Asia, in UK, and also beyond that too. Our focus has really not been only to praise the incredible work of tukang, although that would be quite a straightforward thing to do, but to try and apply this tradition to what lessons can be learnt from it in contemporary architectural and design practice. Martina Margetts, who spoke in our first dialogue, talked about how tradition is at its heart not a static process, but a dynamic one. And the videos and interviews that have been produced comprise a form of cultural exchange already that serve to show the kind of dynamism of traditional craft and what we can learn from it. And this idea of the benefit of acts of sharing information for reciprocal benefit. This, we hope, will be a kind of in essence, a dynamic relationship that we hope that these videos that will be available after today will generate. And this back and forth of cultural exchange is endemic to the work of our two groups of speakers today, Shao Architects, which is based in 3 countries, and the One-to-One Collective, which not only has a team reflective of London's full diversity, but has strong connections and fascination with Japanese craft cultures, as you can see in the interview as a part of the About Making project. So I've finished the introduction there. We'll go straight into the presentations after I've read biographies. And what I'll encourage you to do is to write down any questions that you have in the chat during the question and answer session, which will be just after 2 o'clock. We can unmute you and turn your video on if you would like. So I'm going to now move on to the bios. I hope you enjoy the speakers, and I'll give all the bios in one go. And we're going to have Daliana and Florian first, and then Salah and Pablo from One-to-One second. So Daliana Suryawinata is the founding partner of Shao and graduated from Tarumanagara University in Jakarta, Indonesia, and also the Berlage Institute in Rotterdam. She is currently an urban design coordinator at Future Cities Lab in Singapore. Her partner in the architectural practice, Florian Heinzelmann, also a co-founding partner of Shao, graduated from Munich University of Applied Sciences in Germany and the Berlage Institute in Rotterdam, and completed his PhD dissertation at the Department of the Built Environment at TU Eindhoven. He is currently Associate Professor in Practice at the National University of Singapore in the Department of Architecture. And Salah Critchen and Pablo Boriak are core members, alongside Madoka Ellis, of the One-to-One Collective, a young and ambitious collective of architectural designers and makers with a special appreciation for craft, community, and sustainability. Members of this practice come from a shared architectural education at Kingston School of Art, where I'm speaking today, collaborating in Takeshi's Hayatsu's MA Arc studio on a one-to-one installation of a Japanese tea house, and also works with local partners, the Community Brain. Pablo has held a 3D workshop fellowship at KSA, and Salah currently co-leads M-Arc unit with Takeshi. Exhibition work of the collective includes The Origin at Stanley Picker Gallery, and Ouroboros Biomimicry at the V&A recent. Other projects include the Farm of Futures, wayfinding and public realm improvements in Tolworth, alongside projects across Europe, bringing together community-based participation with an innovative approaches to craft, play, inclusivity, and design, expanding beyond the borders of architecture. And they will say more about this very shortly. So I'll now pass over to Shao Architects, Florian and Daliana, and I look forward to joining you and moderating the discussion in a little while. Thank you.
Excellent. So yeah, please cut us off if you're too much in 15 minutes. We have a lot of slides, and what do you press? Okay. We often introduce ourselves with this world map. Unfortunately, it's the Mercator projection. We just were in a Bucky-Fuller exhibition. We should change this world map. But what it shows actually quite interesting as a sort of a background for also exchange in our practice is a bit of a diametrical opposite, not only geographically, but culturally and climatically. And in our idea, with a little bit like the socio-climatic architecture that has great influence on the making, on the communication, and of course on the perception of space. So if you talk about climate, of course we have in Northern Europe, in the Northern Hemisphere, not Northern Europe, we have the draft, and we have the seasons, and draft is something you want to avoid. Whereas in Southeast Asia, cross ventilation is coming back or referring back to the vernacular architecture in the Tukang. Maybe with the Rumah Panggung, the house on stilts, this is something you would like to have, right? So both Daliana and I, we have spent ample times in Europe, but then coming back, at least for her, to Indonesia, also meets a great deal of relearning or unlearning things in the way of making. So it's like maybe the formal versus the informal, the drawing, the BIM versus maybe the negotiation. So nothing is set in stone. And the contracts may be out of a sort of more Protestant tradition, contractual agreement, versus a bit of the handshake. So this is different modes of operations which you have to take into consideration if you operate maybe in Southeast Asia. Very shortly, yes, so Daliana is originally from Indonesia, studied there, worked for a couple of important Indonesian architects, Andra Matin, Hanawal, Yori Antar, then went to the Berlage Institute, worked for MVRDV OMA and West 8, and now is at the Future Cities Lab. Myself, as already mentioned, went to the University of Applied Sciences in Munich, did an internship in Japan, worked for a big office there, went to in Germany, went to the Berlage, worked for UN Studio, to Delft, to Eindhoven, and now I'm at the Department of Architecture at the National University of Singapore. So you see we have like zigzagging CVs crisscrossing all over the planet, and in a way that also reflects back into our work. Yeah, we do several projects from small scale to markets to master plans, housing, but a lot of public space projects. So public space projects and the social climatic aspect is yeah, really part, or that one we're most interested in. One of our first projects we had in Indonesia is the microlibrary Bima, and it's insofar interesting in terms of how we almost collided in the beginning in this process of the making, and I would like to explain that a little bit. So you see here is a sort of house on stilts, but not really in a way that it is sort of formalized and planned back then, but more like a coincidence, because they had already a stage there at this local square. And if we would have put the library on the ground floor, then either the stage would have to go or the football field in front. So in a way, this is already some form of negotiation between what is there and the locals, and then putting the building up, and with that creating added value. At the same time, back then, or still, our mission is to reuse as much as possible, take materials into consideration. So we had a look in the neighborhood, and for instance, we found these cherry cans. And we wanted to reuse them for the facade material. But when it was so far for actually constructing the building, they were not available anymore. And then we looked around and found then be an online vendor reused ice cream buckets. So it took us 3 months to source these ice cream buckets. And the idea is having this breathable facade with shade inside, but diffused natural light and cross ventilation. And floating volume in a way shades the space underneath and makes it also more livable. The arrangement of those is in a binary code like 01100, which is reading, if you spiral around, Buku adalah jendela dunia, books are the windows to the world, which is a message from the mayor. But of course, the difficulty is how to make this, and writing this little script in Rhino to place us or in Grasshopper to place us all these buckets. That's simple, but then in the end you have to communicate that. And so we went with a lot of elevations, printouts to the site, and really managed one-to-one talking with the people there that all these buckets are arranged in a proper order. And even later, we renovated the building, the facade, because some of these buckets were brittle. So again, we went to the same process of really manually checking and talking with people. So you see here an interior photo, so how the atmosphere plays out in terms of lighting. So this whole library can be used with daylight. No artificial light is necessary, but at the same time, it's cool and naturally ventilated. And so, yeah, like I said, a little bit of the collision. So what we expected, I mean, when you draw, that there's a certain precision, and then we figured out that this precision maybe is not there. And you have to negotiate with that, and you have to live with that, and you have to take this into consideration when you draw your details. But on the other hand, the Tukang and the craftsmen were quite inventive, let's say, because how do you make all these holes into these buckets? So they came up with this punching tool, and then with this punching tool, which they handmade and welded together, they punched out all the bottoms of these ice cream buckets in order to make it faster. But still, it's a very manual process, and was quite interesting to watch and see how it goes and how all these elements coming together into this whole building in the end.
Yes, so we'd like to show the second project which we have, and it is in Chirobon, West Java as well. And this is the project where, after learning from a lot of different projects that we have to deal with local contractors, which have to be tendered, because in public projects, a lot of the contractors have to be tendered unless it's funded by the CSR, Corporate Social Responsibilities. So in this case, this is a government project. So Ridwan Kamil, former mayor of Bandung, currently governor of West Java, asked a lot of architects to work together with him, and one of these architects are us, Xiao. And after, let's say, successful, perhaps relatively successful, we think it's working relationship with designing several public spaces earlier. He assigned us to work with the city of Chirobon. So there is a piece of land which is really central in the city of Chirobon. And we thought we'd design it with thoughts of cultural reference from the city itself. It's a difficult project in such a way that with this amount of land, around 1.1 hectare, we have to fulfill so many demands. So demands from the mosque, which requires a parking ground and a plaza to extend the prayer outside the mosque. The green area, which needs to be met, and as much as possible, of course, we as architects want to preserve green area. The street vendors, which are already relocated on the site and needs to be positioned there. So in a way, this alun-alun as a public space, it has several demands, and it's always as such anyway. But it also needs to be recreational, has some public playgrounds, and we need to position ourselves against the proclamation monument, which a lot of elders in the city really appreciate. So it does have a lot of complications, and it results in a kind of programming which is more, let's say, more complex, more like a list of things. So it's from the how to position yourself to the mosque. We also added a library in there. There is a playground. The PKL means the food court, jogging track, basically places for people to gather and mingle, and we have to kind of situate a plaza in front of the proclamation monument. And of course, not forget to mention the main plaza in the middle that needs to be used for ceremony, national ceremonies and prayers from the mosque. And the first thing we did was to look at what is like the cultural reference of Chirobon, which is the Candi Bentar, the kind of gate which is everywhere in front of the important buildings of Chirobon, but also in the historical palace of Chirobon, the Keraton. And so we thought we could use this reference and use red bricks, which is really also a familiar element that is being used in Chirobon for the gate, and extend it to the whole plaza. So the gate becomes the pavilion, the memorial plaza, the gate itself, the landscape, the viewing platform, and the micro library, and as well as the 5 pillars gate. So same material for all. And there is also a reason why we pick this material and such form is to have a more forgiving techniques, more forgiving way of constructing in such a way that almost any contractors who won the tender could do it. And that was the case, in fact. So it was forgiving enough. The design was understandable enough for the local contractor to build it. And these are the construction the construction images in the beginning of the process. And the red bricks come, is a local material that is often used, but is also available easily. And these are some of the workers laying the bricks. So they're familiar with this, they're confident with this, and therefore could create a space that is also familiar for the users. We are worried that in such an important place that the residents might not like the plaza, and it is important for them to enjoy it because they're the users and they're very important. So these are images of the daytime pictures and the usage. On the left, the 5 pillars gate to the mosque, and on the right top, that's the playground. And this is the micro library, which we inserted as a kind of literacy program to add to the park. So it's not just about recreation, entertainment, but also education in a way that completes the religious element, which is already there. So all in bricks. These are Instagram users upload, and we think they're enjoying the space, and it's working quite well up to now. And the third project, and Florian will continue this, is our microlibrary Warakayu in Sumarang. So we went from Bandung to Chirobon to Sumarang, each local context with its specificities. But in this case, being sponsored by a wooden prefabrication manufacturer, we'd like to bring forward the use of wood and its rumah panggung kind of construction technique that is very common in Southeast Asia, but also the kind of cultural exchange, reciprocity between the German Solinger construction and the Warak Ngendok kind of cultural reference as a mystical animal, which Florian will mention very soon. Oh, yes, you can go for it.
No, basically, this diagram explains via the section and the screen a little bit how we went into the design process, because it's sort of a bottom-up design process where we first looked at the material properties or the material availability from the factory, and then into the form, geometry, and climatic performance. And along the way, we discovered this sort of scale diamond-shaped pattern, which reminds the Warak Ngendok, the icon of Sumarang. So therefore, we call it Warak Kayu, sort of the wooden dragon-like creature of Sumarang. But what is important with this sort of latest or almost latest project being built is a little bit also our journey in terms of the making from this very down-to-earth, knee-deep in the mud, discussing on-site with the tukang, to also maybe a bit more of a contemporary or modern, yet still Indonesian way of production, which is with a timber factory. Because there is a lot of pollution also in Indonesia, and brick concrete is not necessarily the most sustainable material, and especially if it's about waste management and water management. So having actually a non-tukang or non-craftsman approach in Indonesia can also make some sense, because in the factory you can manage all the waste, and the waste can go back into new products or different products. And of course you can work with a higher degree of precision, and that was very fascinating and worth also exploring within the Indonesian context. So you see a couple of images underneath as a sort of social gathering space with slides for the kids, the seating stairs going up into the library, which can also be used as a little cinema, the reading net, which establishes communication between inside and outside or up and down. And here you see all these different materials we used, and it's mostly Bangkirai finger trend laminate or Meranti plywood products. And as I already mentioned, it is a little bit the idea of the traditional craftsman, which would do a timber frame, solid wood and mortise and tenon joints with wood packs, which is more the vernacular, which was also mentioned earlier. The problem is with the vernacular that very often this knowledge is not there anymore. And now we have to think about, can we make a sort of synthetic vernacular, maybe modern production technology or techniques, and then yeah, in this case post and beam construction was the answer. So the visit to the factory and looking at all the materials they have, and in a way they use a lot of, or they produce a lot of surface materials for hotels and laminates and also flooring. So it was an interesting process to also go with their research and development team into this, all these details. And here you see the first mock-up of the stair and the facade, which was also done for them to learn, for them to test out together with us the details, but also to communicate to the contractor who is assembling that then on site. And here you see some of these wedges, how the lower wedge is sort of inserted into this groove, which holds the plywood boards of the Zollinger facade. Yeah, then the assembly on site, basically delivery in time, if it was possible, and then a relatively swift and clean assembly of the building itself with our contractor there. Yeah, and then finally, I don't know, maybe you want to say something about this?
Yes,
image?
it is important that any building has a community that takes care of it. And in this case, we're very lucky to have the Harvey Center. It's a group of young people based in Sumarang, and they're doing social work, and they're willing to use the microlibrary Warakayu as their base. So they organize this even during the pandemic to allow children from orphanage, from different schools to come play there, but also to read. So we're very much looking forward to further microlibraries where we could explore different techniques, different details, different materiality.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I hope we were somehow in time.
No, thank you very much. That's wonderful, Florian and Daliana. Thank you. We'll return to some of those themes in the chat, most definitely. But I'll pass over the floor straight away to One-to-One Collective.
So, as we've been introduced, we're One-to-One Collective. We're a small practice founded 3 years ago. So we're still somehow researching where we're going and almost the scale of projects that we're comfortable doing. So if we can skip to the next slide. So at the minute we're a group of 8, yeah, a few collaborators that work with us as we were introduced. There is Salah Krishen, Madoka Ellis, and myself that founded the collective, and little by little people have joined from different backgrounds. We all met in university, but nevertheless, we were all from different origins and backgrounds, which I think grew us together and brought us closer in our diversities. I think this is a key element on the foundation of One-to-One Collective, as from the start up, we come from different cultures where not only architecture, but almost the ways of eating are different. Therefore, we had to learn an international common language built upon our different experiences. So we move to the next slide briefly, and to the next one after as well. In university, as Stefan was saying, we had a great influence from the Japanese culture. It was brought to us through Takeshi Hayatsu, that's tutor in masters now, and Salah is teaching partner in his studio. And we researched basically the traditional Japanese architecture. In this model that we can see in the image, we made a model of the temple, of the entrance to the temple in Nara to Todaiji. And it was fascinating somehow to understand how the building had lived through times, through hundreds of years, by little repairs and little maintenance, which somehow it's not comparable. Maybe in Europe, no, we build for things to last. They built for things to be repaired, right? And to be able to disassemble and reassemble. If we move to the next images, just pass through the next 4. Yep. So these are little details of that model that became a bigger structure. If we can move to the next. I think one of these cultural exchanges where we somehow had to absorb as much as we could was when in our field trip as students to Japan, which is this image that you see in the screen, where we tested some of the ideas that we brought as from the UK, but then we learned through their craftsmen and through their miyadaikus, no, the carpenters that have been trained for years. And I think this was as well one of these moments where we had to let go. What I was saying before, no, the cultures that we brought, we had to let them go to incorporate this new knowledge that was kind of given to us. So if we can move to the next, that little structure that you see on the front was then incorporated by the locals. So it was a test for us, but the locals then incorporated into their activities and into their festivals, no, as a little food stall. In the next image, we can see a model that somehow derived from that experiment or that testing ground that we did in Japan, and was specialized and transformed onto what would become an exhibition in the Barbican about the Japanese culture and the Japanese architecture. So if we move to the next image, we can see what this tea house that we experimented in Japan, then did a dry run in the library in Kingston University in Knights Park, and then was transformed onto the final building in the Barbican. I think there is an adaptation on the craft. There is an adaptation on the materials that you can source here and how they are, the types of wood, how you treat them. So what one-to-one I think has absorbed from these experiences, if we can progress on the images, just 4 or 5, where is how to incorporate what we learned in our field trips and from each other and from our different cultures into something that stands and lives in the UK, right? Or in this case, because we're based in the UK, but I think it's about, we were discussing with Salah a bit this morning, no, and we came up with this funny little sentence, which is act local, but think global, right? So the thinking global means that you have to act globally into the particular. And I think if we continue with the images, with the slides, couple more. Yep. Yep. Okay, we'll stay there. We've somehow adopted these techniques, and I would say these formal design aspects of the Japanese culture into what we do a bit more on our professional side. What we're showing now, it's some sort of our influence and what derives from this Japanese influence. If we can go to the previous slide, please. Just a couple before. Yes. So in this image, we see a shed, which is a very British standard for the semi-detached house, right? It's a typology in itself. And I think that ties in very well with this cultural exchange, right? So we learned from the Japanese culture and the making and the disassembling and the repairing and some techniques as well, like the yakisugi, burning the cladding to waterproof it rather than adding a paint or varnish. And then, thanks to Takeshi's vision, I think, we transformed that knowledge into a shed, right? Which it's very, very different as a typology, but these sheds represent the garden typology of the semi-detached, but as well how you guys copied it, no, Salah, with the studio, was by making a flat pack element that could be disassembled, repaired, and reconstructed again somewhere else. So it's bringing these two knowledges, right, Sally? Kind of these two almost a typology and a philosophical way of doing things, and they combine very well. That's why I wanted to speak about this, the shed, no, exhibiting the V&A and so on. Okay, we can continue through the slides, and then these are the floats, right, Salah? The Japanese floats.
Yeah, I guess I could say a little bit about that. I mean, that was, I guess, quite an important part for us later on as kind of professionals and one-to-one, was actually doing these sort of student projects that were heavily sort of embedded within the community and had a lot of sort of community involvement and engagement throughout. And so this was influenced by Japanese festival floats, but was sort of reimagined using quite standard sort of off-the-shelf materials from within the UK, and combining it into something that was made for the Seething Festival here in Kingston and Surbiton.
Which somehow is, again, this idea of bringing together culture and people. So you have the traditional Japanese floats, no, for a festival that's brought into Tolworth, into Surbiton, and it somehow brings people together, right? So we are again bridging these two cultures and bridging these activities, I would say. So in the next image, we can see the opening day when all the kids and Salah is there on the background pulling the yatai. I like this idea that it only rolled 7, 8, 10 meters. That's what. Yeah. But everyone was so joyful. It was this activity of collaboration, not only the building, but as well the act of using the building, which. It's very, very, very important. So we're gonna show on the next slides somehow what we link. So our ground in the UK, right? Because what we've spoken a lot, everything is made in the UK, but there is a lot of intellectual influence from Japan in particular. But in our practice, so we design designers and architects, and we have another which is a community and education base. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the reality is that where you sit and the soil you touch is what makes you, what defines you. What I was saying about thinking global but at local. So in the next slide. Is one of our first projects, just based in the River Thames. So at the end of the day, our common ground has been Kingston Workshop, Kingston Design Studios, Tolworth is the area. So I think talking with the owners of the bars, right, drives you already into this locality, right, in what Kingston, that it's very different from Japan. The next image is just a model that we made very in the early stages, and this one is the Farm of Futures, which is our workshop, office, and community center. So is one of our ongoing projects that I think will never be finished, because is the sum of a lot of people coming and adding ideas and building upon. Sally, so the farm, it's
yeah. Totally, yeah. So I suppose we think of it as a farm in the kind of obvious sense. It's based in an allotment site, and there's a kind of farming of fruit and veg, and we've got chickens and bees that we kind of keep, and an aquaponic system. But it's also sort of a space where we farm what we call waste into usable products or usable materials, and so it's a bit of a kind of an upcycling hub. Where it's been kind of fully renovated and rebuilt using materials that have been about to be sent to landfill from exhibitions, or generally materials that probably aren't good enough to be sort of on a shelf in a shop, that are kind of then passed on to us and stuff, and kind of making use of what is available to us to really make this place come to life and be usable space, not just for us to be there, but actually for the local community. And so there's sort of maker space, thinking space, and growing space as we kind of talk about it. I'm aware of sort of time, so just to kind of quickly flick through, yeah, we sort of first arrived there and it was sort of filled with all kinds of stuff, from kind of human-sized hungry hippos to all kinds of
if we can pass some slides so that while we can.
Yeah, and then sort of over time we kind of taken over it, and now it's been a kind of a usable space. And just being in that space has meant that we've been doing much more community-led designing and also making. So when we get to the kind of bee benches, this was a project that kind of stemmed out of being at the Farm of Futures and sort of working closely with the Community Brain, who are our close partners. And realizing that there was a demand by the local kind of residents to have some kind of pocket park in a very underused space. And the idea was to kind of create this, the Beelines furniture, what we called it. And actually now the passage has been renamed to the Beelines Way, and working with sort of local artists and landscape designers and the community itself to actually design the elements and bring them together and to kind of plant it all together.
4 slides forward so we can see that that image that Salah was describing. Yeah, so that's the community of New Malden and the Greater Kingston area collaborating to plant the beeline park that Salah was describing. In the next image, yeah, and then we have ITV, which I think it's interesting. Salah, I'm gonna say a couple of words, but it's almost a product, right? So for ITV, at the end of the day, big chain, quite, and we end up making this bug hotel. So I always have to say this twice because it seems that I say Bogota hotel. So this hotel for bugs, yeah. All with reclaimed material. So it was some sort of, juxtaposition as well, no? This very clean TV element with this very messy, full of spiders and found things and mud and grass. And so, this is as well somehow bringing these two things, this dichotomy, always two sides of one coin, maybe is a way of seeing it. And Sally?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of, I'm cautious of time as well. So just to kind of flick through, I guess a continuation is that kind of continued onto some of the educational stuff that we've been doing, working with schools and the children within to kind of design playgrounds, do kind of artwork and design the displays that go with them that are often really quite kind of children-led, and we're just there to kind of help accommodate and stuff. And I guess really pass on what that kind of collaborative nature of making that we kind of brought us together, and trying to kind of pass that on to others, not just university students, but even kind of quite young primary school children at times. And just as the kind of final one to kind of quickly flick through is really that kind of collaborative, talks about the kind of collaborative notion and community-led design within kind of Tolworth, and the nature reserve, sort of the wayfinding we've recently been doing in Tolworth, leading people to the nature reserve, is really one of those projects where, again, sort of from the design to the realization of what the local community demands are to the actual making, is all really based on sort of using the kind of local skill, local people, accommodating it, bringing in students from local schools, universities, and various kind of organizations and groups together to kind of make something that everyone sort of has a lot of pride in. And I'm not quite sure where we are on the slides because I cannot actually see what we're presenting, but if we kind of get to that image of the gate, Pablo.
So that's 3 up from where we are now. 3, 4. The other way around, sorry, backwards. Yep, that one. Yeah, there we are.
Yeah, so just maybe this is one that we can maybe end on, but I guess this is again that continuation of doing something that's actually all about the kind of local space. A lot of it was about reusing materials that have been from kind of demolitions or kind of removing things from the local high street to then repurpose them and bring them back in. And this is also one that shows that kind of something that we kind of picked up from Japan, and we've kind of been using, whether it's kind of using it on that kind of in a residential scenario on a kind of shed-like typology, or actually using it for public realm to find sustainable ways of kind of dealing with the timber and stuff. And so this is the kind of an entrance to the nature reserve where, yeah, it was really sort of a fun project to kind of work with such a wide range of members from the local community to kind of realize something, and also realize how even with kind of such a little budget, you can make things happen and provide people with the kind of opportunity to access green space, especially when it's kind of unknown to them that this exists.
Super, thank you so much for the presentation, and sorry for the kind of screen share issue, but it worked quite well to kind of help assist the exchange. I'd invite the audience to write down any questions on the chat. I've just got one that kind of had slightly prepared to get things going, and I'm sure Christoph will come in. And yeah, good to see you again, Florian and Daliana. But just, we had a similar question actually at the end of last week's dialogue with Wim Varavan, which is, I wanted to ask about the issue of difficulties, any challenges or difficulties that you have in accessing, and this goes for both presentations and both architectural organizations, the kind of issues that you face in accessing the kind of specialist skill of the local areas in which you work. So I was just thinking about the craft knowledge that you employ in the case of Shao Architects, the kind of contractors, and maybe with one-to-one the kind of community that you are involved in. Thinking about whether you were there any instances where you had to mitigate or overcome any reticence to engage in cultural exchange. So maybe I'll ask Shao first, and then one-to-one you can follow
on. Okay, yeah, difficulties and specialist skills. Yeah, I think like what we mentioned earlier, a lot of knowledge, at least, traditional construction knowledge is in a way got lost over time in Indonesia, and it has very often to do with, let's say, what we see as vernacular architecture, or also what you mentioned as sort of this ideal tropical architecture, got in a way almost eradicated, right, by modern construction materials, be it brick and concrete. Concrete industry is very strong, and that pushed a lot of this craft away. And what happens then is that seasonal workers, when they're not working on the fields, come into the cities and taking then the job up as a tukang. So so you need to look hard to find good qualified labor, and architects often, not all of them, but they started to team up with contractors and make a sort of design and build, and you need an incredible network, and that takes time to figure out and find with whom you can collaborate and establish a mode of operation, let's say, together. And the more specialized you are in some form of material, the better that works, right? So we have a friend in Bandung he's an architect for a long time, and he took over the company from his father, and they're always working together with the same contractor. So basically, he doesn't have to draw plans anymore. It just hands over a SketchUp file, right? And then they know how to execute it because it's always the same details, right? Of course, that in a sort of way becomes then very also, how to say, yeah, regular or almost stifling because there's no more innovation. But on the other hand, what we often do is like falling flat on our faces, trying things and pushing a little bit the boundaries and experimenting. And then, of course, getting surprised if it does not work out. So you need a long breath and sort of position yourself somewhere maybe in between.
Yeah, so I mean, as Florian mentioned, the craftsmanship, the traditional way of making things in Indonesia, they're not there in cities. They are there in villages and traditional homes. There are places like Jepara, which is really known for wood carving, as well as in Yogyakarta, there are still a lot of craftsmen doing things with their hands, weaving and everything. But in cities, Jakarta, Bandung, somehow we just haven't met the right people who could work out this craftsmanship. And if they're there, they're kind of rare. But also for us, Shao, who is practicing on a kind of multiple scale of a range of from the smallest building to a concert hall we're doing right now, it is impossible for us to invest in a team which is doing a certain kind of craftsmanship that we can bring throughout all our work, because we want to experiment with any material possible. And for example, not only with bricks, for example, not only with wood, but with a lot of range of materials. And this is then we have to find always a creative way how to process the materials into a level of creation product that we think is up to our standard. So yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, one more thing. Of course, there's still craft is existing. If you look at batik and textile, and especially the furniture industry and things like this, something which is also can be sold for certain value, or maybe outside of Indonesia. But really, if it's about the building construction, according to our experiences, I think there are a couple of, for instance, offices who are experimenting and building a lot with bamboo on Bali, but they're really dedicated to this one material, and they go really deep into that one, which then means you need a stock of people and you need to train them, and you need to really invest yourself. But if you do not want to go for one material system, then it's a little bit tricky at times. I think that's it.
Yeah, one-to-one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, very similar. I think with us, I guess a lot of the things we've talked about today and previously are much more the things that we are heavily involved in making, which are the kind of smaller scale installations and kind of public realm interventions where we ourselves get involved in that making. I think for us, the struggle is really sort of the change in scale. Obviously, we work on quite a lot of let's say much more architectural projects, larger scale buildings and residential projects and extensions. And that's where we found that a big battle. I think one of the ways that we've been really interested in exploring is actually bringing in certain elements that we ourselves get to make and prototype. And so it's sort of, as sort of Florian was kind of saying, it's sort of accepting that certain things need to be simplified or done in a certain way in order to be delivered to a certain quality by kind of contractors, or sort of know that there's a large chance that contractors can kind of complete that and build that properly, and then having an element that we take over and we can make, for example, bespoke cladding or specific details or handrails or a doorknob or something along those lines where we can have complete control over it, and that becomes the kind of special thing that we celebrate.
Yeah, I completely agree. As you need to know how to let go sometimes, and and even more with international, when there is a border and there is a language barrier and there is a distance, you know, sometimes you just have to say, look, this is where we reach, and then from here onwards, if things transform and if things change, it's, you know, it's not our responsibility anymore somehow.
And just to move on then to a question from Christoph on the chat, but Christoph, do you want to ask it as you're present here?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. So I was kind of following on this notion of lost knowledge, and perhaps also on the fact that you are both operating in different kind of realms, with communities, with clients, but I think also as educators at the University of Singapore and in Kingston. So I was wondering whether you see a role for education in those lost knowledges, in the sense of perhaps being an alternative platform for recuperating or recovering, or even maybe not, or even for transforming traditional knowledges, for inventing. I was kind of wondering a little bit, I think it's quite an open question on whether you think education should be going in that direction of recovery, or whether it should be more about experimentation and invention.
I personally see it that I'm interested, let's say, me personally, in the act of transformation. Of course, there's a tradition of craft, and there's a tradition of, especially in the tropical building, sort of the passive climatic design strategy. So we are both very fascinated in these sort of local typologies where you have overhangs, shades, the covered walkway, the tropical architecture, but then how you can transform that. But the same goes also in terms of construction. And we saw recently a lecture by Kengo Kuma, and I think I found it very fascinating, this sort of in between, the positioning of sort of the past and progress, sort of, you know, not neither nor, but the sort of affirmative of there is a history where we're coming from, but also something which we need to develop further. And I think in terms of education, yeah, I think we have this in a lot of universities, sort of this thinking by making approach. And I think this is really valuable, that the students build prototypes. They don't have to be necessarily in the same material, but in a way, if something is operating, something is working, maybe kinetically moving, sort of making this thinking with your hands is quite an important aspect. And I would love to bring my NUS students over to Indonesia, but so far it was not possible due to the pandemic. But let's see when things are opening up, making excursions and maybe, you know, working then with bespoke kayu lapis factory together to make some prototypes on site. That would be for sure something good.
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of lost traditional details, craftsmanship in Indonesian traditional villages, and some of these are not even documented. So there are some friends such as Yori Antar and his Rumah Asuh Foundation. They're activating a lot of Indonesian universities to come bring their students into the villages, the remote areas all over Indonesia, to have a look at how they do it on the village, to document it, because we are a verbal society. I mean, Indonesia, we don't have a lot of documentation on our richness of culture, even though it's really a lot of things to write about and to document, but it's just the beginning. So I think documentation and putting it into a curriculum of the university, that students have to observe, go there, learn how to do things with their hands, could be interesting, instead of only drawing 3D files and photoshopping.
And yeah, one-to-one.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Xiao. I think what we loved about our kind of education at Kingston, and I guess what made us, or what kind of brought us together, was doing these kind of live projects. The kind of individual thesis work taught us loads, but actually doing those projects together, it was about a lot of things. It was about reacting with sort of real people, real sites, and building something that was real and grounded. It was about learning all these crafts and realizing that, oh wow, like you can actually make something like this and have such a good time with your peers making it. and I think that for us was something that we'd love to kind of continue and see more of in education and across all kinds of years of university. It's like you should be able to know what you're drawing on that paper, and how that works in real life. You should know how heavy a brick is, and you should know how timber feels when it's dry and when it's wet. And that's like super important to then be able to be a good designer. So yeah, I think, and we kind of, between us, we really love that kind of part of education, and we'd love to kind of see more of that.
I like something that Florian said in your presentation about synthetic vernacular. So somehow it's very, very important to learn from the past and from the previous craft, but we have to progress it. Therefore, I think university should teach it, no, and collect the data that's out there, but in order to progress it, in order to transform it, in order to adapt it, to move it forward into the today. No, we live in a different world that we lived, you know, when these methods were invented. So how can we learn from there? No, this and make it modern, or I don't know if it's synthetic, or I don't know what the word is, but definitely teach it to improve it.
Yeah, I definitely thought that the synthetic vernacular phrase was a really good one to pick up on. I'm conscious of time, and there's one question in the chat from Florence Lambert, who's representative of the British Council, and so we might have to close on this question. And she asks, though, to you both, like, how difficult is it to convince your clients to follow the ways of making which you are presenting on today? And let's go the same order, Shao, and then one-to-one.
Yeah, to be honest, when we re-arrive in Indonesia, it's very difficult. It's easier for Florian being German and clearly being a non-Indonesian. But for me as an Indonesian who went abroad for 12 years and coming back, I'm expected to think the way our clients think, and that's not the case, because I've been, I don't know, it's a different way of thinking, having a Dutch architecture education and having worked there for a long time. It was we got our clients through exhibitions, and so try to attract those who are already into our way of architecture. So that's probably one of the best way to already filter the people you're working with, although it's not easy to say because clients are more rare than the amount of architects there are. But we've gone through different range of clients, from those who really connect with us, from those who we didn't know each other and they found us via Instagram, and then we turned out to be a fantastic team, such as the microlibrary Warakayu director, who Kayu Lapis director, who owns the wooden factory, and it was a click. The working was fantastic. There were other clients whom we thought we could work with, and then in the middle of the project, it turned out that it is not possible to contribute what we as architects should in the project, and then we had to say goodbye to those clients. We also had that, and I think we have to be brave to break some relationships, because the result wouldn't be positive. But more or less, some clients, through kind of introducing, opening their minds, it is possible to connect and work together with. But it's not always. It's not like marriage that both parties have to match with each other. It's not that bad, but it is kind of into that direction. It is not easy because we have different feelings, way of working, and preferences, and it is very difficult to match client and architect. But it is very important when a perfect match is made.
One little thing to add, of course, I mean, we are now operating since 2009, and I think most of our work we started to build from 2015-16 on, when we came to Indonesia. And by that time, or by now, we have, I think, a body of work realized, which goes in a certain direction. And that's something good and something bad, because, you know, people know what to expect a little bit from us, and they won't ask us now something completely different. So for instance, we are not villa architect and resort architects, you know, so not many people come for us to want to have a luxury villa, but then, you know, we do public spaces and this social aware or responsible projects, and that is actually, you know, what we can do. And they give us also some freedom in terms of material experimentation, because it's not like, you know, if you have a villa, it's always like, yeah, but I want this floor and I want to pay this money and I want to have this club. So you have very little say. So I think in the type of projects we're already having, we have a sort of, in the smaller projects, maximum freedom, I would argue. So the clients listen to us. Mostly.
I mean, that was nice to hear, because I think that's something that we're investigating quite a bit. And I think probably what our answer was going to be is we're realizing that actually you need to target and work with the clients that will buy into your ways of doing things, making and investing in the kind of detailing and craft. And I think we are, like, you know, with the early projects, and it's quite interesting to hear what Shao was saying, because we've had some clients before where we thought, oh, you know what, you know, maybe we need to do this. We're just starting up. We kind of need the project, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be something that we can really kind of bring in our making into and stuff. And it's ended up being full of making from our side. And actually the tides kind of went from, ooh, do we really want to work with this client? All of a sudden now going, wow, we were so glad we did that, because they were amazing and they bought into our making, and they've allowed us to almost use them as the kind of first trial to say, well, actually, we can make these bespoke elements and we can do these details. We haven't done them in a house yet, but let us do it with you. And they've gone, yes, great, do it. And so you do sometimes find them, and they're now the ones that we're going, great, we need to just find these kind of clients, and lots of them. And that's going to be our challenge, I think, in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, and I think it's as well about, you know, sometimes we need to step down, no? Sometimes, and I find maybe because we're a very young practice still, and we can't say no. How do we find the piece of knowledge in that project, even if it might not be really what we want to be doing? Because is, you know, what type of tile do I want? No, I want this tile at this price, and I'm not going to compromise. Okay, well, so sometimes you have to do these projects, but the ones that click sometimes are what Sally is saying, someone that you don't expect, and all of a sudden you have this fantastic connection, you know, that allows you to drive forward. But I would say, you know, being honest, that sometimes you just cannot choose. You know, you just have to do that project and try to get something out of it, even if it might seem that it's impossible. You know, you're not enjoying it, but what can I bring to the next?
It seems like it's funny to see that architecture design is under service industry, but we're not really service providers, and we're not going to you know, make everything smooth just because the wish of clients that do not match with ours, because we have our own vision, so we have to stick to that. And if clients are not like like in the line with that, then we have to find other people to collaborate and work with us. I mean, that's just as simple as that.
Someone gave me a piece of advice, and it was about the project. Was, did you manage to change the client, kind of thing? Did he change his attitude? No.
Yes, you have to sign the client too.
It's never going to change. You know. So that, well, then you have to plan a strategy. No? You have to plan a strategy to be able to deal with that client. No, did he change? No. Okay, so let's find a strategy so that you can change the interaction, at least between the. But anyway.
Yeah, in the end, it's what Dana said. It is a marriage, you know. You know, how do you bring the other side to do something which they in the beginning do not want, but you have to sell it as their own idea, right? So this is
that's the strategy.
How a successful marriage works. I mean, at least what Dana is always doing to me, you know.
Oh, I remember Alejandro Zerapolo. He's foreign ex-FOA, right now still an architect running a successful practice. So he mentioned this. He was our dean at the Berlage Institute. He said, double agenda. So you tell your client one thing, and then actually you're doing another thing, which is like actually the same thing as a result, but the way you narrate it, the way you tell the story, somehow different audience, different story.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's I might have to kind of bring the conversation to a close now. Just it was a shame because it's really rich what you're saying, and you know, kind of developing on the idea of like all architecture and design practice being a kind of cultural exchange and dealing with the kind of elements that come up from that exchange and how to kind of have two faces and, you know, negotiate any kind of conversation is really interesting, and it's really good to hear that detail. But I need to do just some formalities of like thanking you all. Thanking you, Saleh, Pablo, Daliana and Florian, and thanks so much. This conversation will be available on the About Making YouTube channel. Thank you so much to Anis for the technical support today, and also for Eleena Jamil, who's really been behind this whole project. Christoph, Abbe, and myself are very honoured to have worked with you, Eleena, and thanks to the British Council support too. So going to say goodbye now to everyone, but please do keep in touch with each other. Florence did just reply to the conversation we just had about, you know, the importance of educating our clients or your clients to do more daring work, and the importance of education. I think that's a really good place to leave it. So thanks again for your participation, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye now, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good day.